All right. So guys, hopefully today you have already gone and done your little seed logs. And if all goes according to plan, there should be some germination in there. I'm really hopeful. I'm hoping that some of those seeds have split open. Again, the weather's cool, so it might take us a day or two, but they're really looking pretty swollen yesterday, so I think we should be close. I've asked Miss Bainbridge to make sure there's a spray bottle of water in there. And you may want to take the lid off and give them a little spray down, but just keep in mind that you definitely don't want them to be soaked. You want them to be damp, you want them to be moistened, but you don't want them to be soaking wet. So use your judgment there. And keep in mind not to take my advice, because I kill every plant I've ever touched. All of them. They're all dead. So today, we're just going to quickly finish off yesterday's note on transportation in plants. And then with what time remains, you are free to kind of get your seed log formatted, maybe work on that. If you have anything overdue, which I hope you don't, you can get that in. And you can finish, just sort of anything of that nature. So, again, I hope your seed logs are done, and we can get going here. So, huzzah. So yesterday we started looking at transport in plants. Oh, look at that handsome fellow. And doing so, looking at transport in plants. Oh, that didn't go well. Sorry about that. Oh, no, I don't want a note on the circulatory system, that's for sure. Oh, gosh, sorry. All right, there we go. So we looked at and we said that the main purpose of having a transport system in plants was to move stuff around, transportation. And what kinds of things do we move around? Well, oxygen. Oxygen is a big one. Just like in our bodies, but the main thing in plants, much more so, is water. And that's because plants have to make photosynthesis. They have to make sugars using a process called photosynthesis. And they do that in their leaves, but of course they get the water from their roots. So plants have to have a system at all times that they are active, that they're photosynthesizing. It takes water from the roots and moves it up into the leaves of the plant. They also have to move sugars and other nutrients around, and those don't necessarily go up. Those may go up the plant, but they may also go down the plant or sideways from one leaf to another. And just like our bodies sometimes move messenger compounds, we call them hormones, in our blood, plants can also move messenger compounds in their vascular tissues. So we said the primary flow of water is up. It's from the roots up the plant towards its leaves, though there is a secondary system that can move materials in the opposite direction. And so we said these two systems have two different types of tissues, xylem and phloem. And xylem are the cells that move water up the plant, that primary system. And these are dead tissues. Once they're grown in place, they die, and they just form solid tubes. These are like the pipes in your house. I, for example, right now I'm sitting in my sadness cave, and all of the water pipes go through this room. So if somebody runs a faucet, you'll hear it. But like the copper piping in your house, or like all the waste pipes as well, these are just dead inert tubes. The second system in plants are vascular cells called phloem. And these are different because they're active cells. They're living, and they are actively in control of the movement of materials. And that means that flow can be multidirectional. Now, looking at xylem yesterday, we said again, these are responsible for that constant flow up. And even though the tubes themselves are dead, the rate of flow through the xylem can be adjusted. How does that happen? Well, there's three major forces that drive water up through the xylem. And the first is what we call root pressure. And this is exactly what it sounds like. It's pressure on the plant from the roots. So the root cells actively pump water into the xylem. And because they're actively pumping water into the xylem, that forces water up the xylem toward the leaves. Now, to do that all the way up an oak tree or all the way up a redwood tree would be really energetically unfavorable. So while this happens, it can't be the only source of force to move water up. So another is called capillary action. And we looked at this yesterday with the capillary tubing. We said that water has cohesive and adhesive properties, and as a result, it climbs the sides of a tube. It's called capillary action. And in a big tube, it just looks like a little climbing of the sides. Just a little meniscus like that. But the narrower you make the tube, the more it climbs the sides. And if you make the tube narrow enough, it will actually start to climb up the tube as a column. And the narrower the tube, the higher that column can go. So we looked at the little capillary tubes yesterday, which have about a 0.5 millimeter diameter, and that allowed water to move about 1 centimeter up. But if you make the tube substantially smaller than that, the water can raise substantially higher. And that's one of the things plants do. Instead of having a single tube like that is just the height of the plant, they have many, many, many very small xylem tubes. And because they're very small in diameter, capillary action also draws water up the tube. And that plus the pump of the root pressure provides a lot of force, but still doesn't provide all of it. There's a third, which is called transpiration pull. And this also has to do with the fact that water is cohesive, which means water sticks to itself, which means that as the water column is nearing the top of that column, its exit in the leaves, which happens at an opening called the stoma, or stomate, water evaporates because it's coming into contact with the air. But as water evaporates, because it is cohesive, it pulls on the molecule behind it, lifting it up to the top. And when that molecule evaporates, it pulls the one behind it, which pulls the one behind it, and so on and so forth. And this pulls the column of water up. And we call this transpiration, and this is transpiration pull. This leads to what we call the transpiration tension theory of xylem flow, which basically holds that the main force pulling water up a plant is just the cohesion of water and the evaporation at the top. And one of the great things for the plant is that it can then control this flow, because if it closes the openings at the top of the plant, if it closes these stomates, then that stops water flow, and that would stop water loss. On the other hand, if it needs to make water really flow, it can open the stomates wide. And the way it does that is by controlling how much water is in the two cells that make up the stoma. These are called guard cells. And if they are flaccid, if they have low water pressure inside, then they just kind of slump next to each other, and there's no opening to speak of, and so the stomate is effectively closed, and no water is really going to come through. But if we pump the guard cells full of water, they bulge. And as they bulge, they make this circular shape, and they leave an opening which allows water to flow out, to evaporate, and that results in transpiration, pulling water up the xylem. So that's how xylem works. And I know that was quick, but that should be a review from yesterday. So if you're in class, I hope that doesn't feel like it was too hard to follow. Today we're going to quickly cover how phloem works, which is a different transport system altogether. Now, I did a little model of this yesterday where I had a source beaker and a sink plastic container, and I ran a tube between them, and we put food coloring in one, and we were able to rather easily make it flow through the tube and into the other. So we're going to formalize that today. But that's the basic function of how phloem works. So phloem, distinct from xylem, is the active transport system. of plants. And by active, I mean it takes energy. So let's write that. Phloem is a multi-directional transport system. And that means it doesn't have to just go from bottom to top or top to bottom or anything else, but rather it can transport in any direction the plant needs to move materials. That's an active process that requires living cells to work. One of the main purposes of this is to move sugar from the leaves of the plant to other parts of the plant that need them. So that's not by any means the only purpose of the phloem, but one of the main purposes of phloem is to move sugar from the leaves around the plant, which the xylem can't do because the xylem stops at the leaves. That's the end point of xylem flow. So one of the main purposes is to move sugars through the plant. And really, this should be below, but we're going to need the space below. This works by differences in chemiosmotic pressure. What? Which basically just means this. Materials move from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. If you study physics, this is related to a concept called entropy. But you don't really need to be a physicist to understand this. As I said yesterday, you just have to have spent some time in the halls of Eastdale and seen some poor grade 9 boy spraying himself down with Axe body spray. Because in that moment, the smell around him is incredibly strong. And down in Beccario's room, they're not smelling it yet. But 10 minutes later, that smell is spreading out, and you can start to smell it down the hall, and it's not quite as intense where it first started. And an hour later, it's spread out so you can kind of smell it everywhere in the school. And 2 hours later, you can't smell it anywhere because it's just spread to the outside. Things move from where there's lots of them out to where there's not. And the physics of that is interesting. It's related to something called Brownian motion. There's lots going on, but you don't have to know that. Basically, nature likes to spread things out, naturally speaking. Things don't stay together. If you imagine if you take a bunch of water and put it in one place and let go of it, right? If you have a balloon full of water and you let go of it, the water wants to spread out. You see, if you put a drop of food coloring in water, you don't have to stir. If you leave it long enough, it will spread itself out evenly throughout the water. So that's the basic idea here. And how xylem works is by something called the pressure flow theory. And the basic idea is this. We have what we call the source, and then we have the actual phloem tube itself. And these tubes can go all over the plant and branch and be in all sorts of different directions. And it doesn't matter, but at one of them, we have the sink. And basically, we can do this. A material we want to move is pumped into the phloem at the source. Diffusion causes that material to flow throughout the phloem. Now, left to itself, that will go everywhere in the plant, but we don't necessarily want it to go everywhere in the plant. We may want it just to go to one specific place in the plant. We don't want to waste that material and send it everywhere. We want to make it go from the source to the sink, to the place we want it to go. Well, the way you handle that is while the material is being pumped into the phloem at the source, the material is pumped out of the phloem at the sink. And the result of that is that we are always creating an area of high concentration at the source and an area of low concentration at the sink. And that means that nature will do the moving for you. So, as weird as this may sound, but if we had tubes and liquid in them connecting every place in Canada, you wouldn't need something to steer around. If you're a tree, where you make the sugar, you could just pump the sugar into the phloem. It will start to spread out everywhere. But then where you want sugar, you can just start pulling sugar out of the phloem, and it will take care of moving itself to that place more just by diffusion. Just the fact that you're pulling sugar out at the sink means that sugars that you're pumping into it at the source will naturally want to move there. Because in nature, things naturally move from where there's a lot of them to where there's a little bit of them. So all you have to do is control movement at the source where you're putting it in and the sink where you're taking it out, and the movement between those two places happens naturally, happens automatically. So the actual movement from one place to another is passive. The only active part is pumping it into the vessels themselves. With that in mind, we might as well actually look at these vessels. And you can see that xylem cells can take a variety of shapes. They can have sort of some striations at their end, or they can be totally open, but they're always dead cells. On the other hand, if you look here, phloem is actually two types of cells together. We have the sieve tube cells, which are exactly what they sound like, the actual tubes that fluid moves through. And we have what are called the companion cells, and these do the active pumping of material. And you can see that there is always, because they're live cells, these aren't just open, there's always this kind of porous junction from one sieve cell to another. They're continuous, they make a continuous tube, but it's almost like at the end of each individual cell, there's a little filter between the two. Some xylem also has this, though some don't, but phloem cells always do. So that is the main comparison there. But note, too, that these are both living, in contrast to the xylem, which are dead cells. These are essentially just tubes connected to each other. As compared to these, which are two types. Another note about sieve tube cells, and sorry, I should have put this above, but like me, you can, of course, just highlight that and move it down, which is, these are discrete living cells, but when mature, they have no nuclei. And they have porous openings between them. And so there we have our comparison of the cells of xylem with the cells of phloem. So I hope that was straightforward enough, and I hope it was helpful for you. You should have a fair amount of time left in this period. You can use it to get caught up on work. Most of you owe me something. If you owe me nothing, good for you. I'm very proud of you. Use this time productively for something else, for one of your other classes. But please don't be noisy. Don't be a menace. Especially if you've got a guest in our class, to whomever it may be today. And it'd be very inconsiderate to be noisy and disruptive. To say nothing of being a bad look for me, because I probably should have left more work for you than this, but I really do want to give anyone who has a thing or two that they owe me a chance to get caught up. Please don't make me regret that. All right, have a wonderful day, guys. I'll see you tomorrow. Auf Wiedersehen.